The morning sunlight barely filtered through the half-open blinds as I sat across from Ethan at the breakfast table. The clinking of his spoon against the cereal bowl was the only sound between us. He didn't look up, his eyes glued to the screen of his phone, fingers scrolling endlessly. I waited for him to say something, anything. But as usual, he didn't. He stood up, mumbled a distracted goodbye, and walked out the door without touching the coffee I'd made. We had been married for 5 years. In the beginning, things had been warm, filled with laughter, midnight talks, spontaneous trips, and those stolen glances that made me feel beautiful. But somewhere along the way, life crept in with its responsibilities, routines, and exhaustion. Ethan's work started demanding more of him. Promotions led to long hours, and long hours led to silence between us. That silence, once tolerable, now felt like a wall I couldn't climb. I started noticing the changes slowly. The way he brushed past me without noticing the new dress I wore. How our conversations revolved around grocery lists and bills instead of feelings or dreams. Our intimacy faded until it became a ghost, something we both knew once existed but no longer reached for. I tried at first. I'd place my hand on his shoulder while he worked, send flirty texts during the day, even planned a weekend getaway. He always had an excuse. Too much work this week. Or I'm just tired. I stopped trying after a while. I began to feel like a guest in my own marriage. That's when I met Kwame. It was at a local community event organized for the neighborhood. I was volunteering for the garden initiative, something to fill my afternoons and distract me from the hollow quiet at home. Kwame was there too, laughing with kids, digging into the soil like he'd done it all his life. He was from Ghana, a school counselor by profession, and had recently moved into our complex. His smile was genuine, the kind that reached the eyes, and when he spoke, people listened. Our first conversation was brief, just a passing joke about how bad I was with plants. But he remembered. The next time we met, he brought me a tiny potted succulent. "This one doesn't need much attention," he said with a wink. That small gesture lingered with me longer than it should have. We began seeing each other more often, mostly in groups, sometimes walking home after the events. He asked questions no one else had asked in years. "Are you happy? What do you dream about lately?" Questions that caught me off guard and forced me to confront parts of myself I'd buried beneath laundry piles and unspoken frustrations. I found myself laughing around him. Real laughter, not the polite kind I used with Ethan's colleagues. With Kwame I felt heard. Important. And yet I kept telling myself it was harmless. That it was just friendship. Nothing had happened. No lines had been crossed. But I couldn't deny the way I checked my appearance before seeing him. How I lingered in our conversations just a little longer than necessary. How his compliments felt like sunlight on skin that had been cold for too long. He noticed when I changed my hairstyle. When I seemed tired. When I forced a smile. Ethan hadn't noticed those things in months. Still, I wasn't stupid. I knew where this road could lead. I was married. Kwame was just a friend. I told myself that repeatedly. Each time we laughed too long, each time our fingers brushed as we passed garden tools or coffee cups. I told myself, it's not cheating if nothing happens. But something was happening. Just didn't have a name yet. One afternoon, after everyone had left the community center, I stayed behind to help clean up. Kwame was there too. We talked as we wiped down tables, the kind of quiet, easy talk that fills the space between people who are slowly growing closer without meaning to. He asked how things were with Ethan. I hesitated. Then I said, "We're surviving." He didn't push. He just nodded, as if he already understood. Later that night, lying next to Ethan, I stared at the ceiling while he snored softly beside me. I felt the heat of guilt creep into my chest. I hadn't done anything wrong. Not yet. But I was thinking about another man. A man who remembered how I liked my coffee. Who noticed the sadness behind my smile. And that, in itself, felt like betrayal. The sky was overcast the day everything shifted. Clouds hung low like secrets too heavy to rise. I had just finished some errands when I passed by Kwame's apartment. He was on his balcony, watering a row of plants. He waved and called down. "Got 5 minutes?" I did. More than 5, actually. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and something warm I couldn't name. Music played softly in the background. Jazz, something old and slow. He handed me a cup of tea without asking how I liked it. He already knew. We sat across from each other on the floor, cushions under us, the rain beginning to tap gently against the windows. I told myself this was still innocent, that sitting here like this meant nothing. But the way his eyes met mine, calm and curious, never demanding, unraveled something I'd kept tightly wound. "You look tired," he said. I looked down, unsure how to respond. "I'm fine." "You don't have to be," he said quietly. I don't know what broke me in that moment. Maybe it was the softness in his voice, or the truth I hadn't said aloud to anyone. My hands trembled slightly as I set the cup down. And then I began to cry. Not the polite kind of crying you do in public. This was deep and wordless, like I was mourning something I didn't fully understand. Kwame didn't move at first. Then he leaned forward and placed his hand over mine. His touch was warm, gentle, steady. "I don't know who I am anymore," I whispered. "You're someone who deserves to feel alive," he replied. That was all it took. The kiss was soft at first. Neither of us moved quickly. It felt hesitant, like a question neither of us wanted to fully ask. My heart was pounding, but I didn't stop him. I didn't pull away. His hand stayed respectful, cupping my face, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. When I closed my eyes, I stopped thinking about right or wrong. I just let myself feel. One kiss turned into another, then another. I don't remember the moment we moved to the couch, or how the spaces between our bodies vanished. I only remember the way he looked at me, like I was something valuable, not forgotten, like I mattered. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't rough. It wasn't what I thought infidelity would feel like. There was no music swelling in the background, no dramatic thunder, just skin against skin, breath against breath, and a fragile tenderness I hadn't known I'd missed so deeply. When it was over, we lay there in silence. Not the cold silence of my kitchen mornings with Ethan. This one was warm, full. I stared at the ceiling, afraid to speak. Kwame turned his head toward me and whispered, "I didn't plan this." "I know," I said. "Neither did I." He reached out and brushed his fingers along my arm. "You don't have to explain anything. But I want you to know, I see you. And that's not just about what happened today." I wanted to cry again, but this time for a different reason. The guilt didn't hit me right away. It came later, like a tide pulling back before it returns to drown everything. I left his apartment quietly, as if not making noise could undo what had happened. I walked home in the drizzle, feeling both light and impossibly heavy. When I entered our apartment, Ethan wasn't home yet. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the mirror, wondering if something in me looked different now. If my face carried a mark of what I had done. That night I cooked dinner like usual. Ethan came home late, distracted. He kissed my cheek and told me about a meeting. I nodded and smiled in all the right places, but my chest ached with the weight of something I couldn't share. I lay beside him in bed later. His back turned as he drifted off. I reached out to touch his shoulder but pulled back before my fingers made contact. I thought about Kwame's hands. How different they felt, not just in touch but in intention. I don't know what this means yet. I don't know if it was a mistake or something I needed to remember myself. What I do know is that I betrayed my marriage. But even more than that, I betrayed the numb version of myself I had become. And that, somehow, felt like the cruelest truth of all. I didn't see Kwame for a few days after that. He didn't text. I didn't call. It was like we both silently agreed that what happened needed space. Or distance. Or maybe just time to exist without us trying to name it. I kept moving through the motions of my life. Making dinner. Cleaning. Laughing politely when Ethan made small talk. But inside everything felt different. Every moment with him now felt like an echo of what used to be, not what was. One morning I sat across from my therapist, staring at the corner of the rug. She waited for me to speak, her gaze soft but unrelenting. "I made a choice," I finally said. "One I didn't plan to make." She tilted her head. "Do you regret it?" I didn't know how to answer that. Was it regret? Or was it just shame? "I regret not feeling guilty sooner," I said. She nodded, letting silence fill the room again. "Are you in love with him?" "No," I said too quickly. Then paused. "Maybe not love. But I felt seen. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. That was the only truth I could cling to." At home, Ethan carried on, seemingly unaware of the shift. He still came home late, still talked about work, still fell asleep within minutes of his head hitting the pillow. One evening, he told me about a trip he had to take, a weekend conference in another city. I nodded and pretended to care about the schedule. Inside I was spiraling. That weekend, the silence in our apartment felt louder than usual. I kept pacing, starting tasks and abandoning them. My phone stayed face down. I didn't want to message Kwame. I didn't know what I would even say. But I didn't need to. On Sunday evening, I found a note slid under my door. It was from him. "I'm leaving tomorrow for Ghana. Family emergency, and maybe a break I didn't know I needed." I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. What we shared. "I'll never pretend it didn't matter. But I care about your peace more than my presence in your life. You deserve clarity and space. Kwame." My throat tightened. I folded the note and held it to my chest, unsure whether I wanted to cry or scream. He was right to leave. Right to not ask anything from me. But it still felt like something precious had been quietly taken away. That night, I walked to the window and looked toward his apartment. The lights were off. Just stillness. I stood there for a long time, hoping maybe the door would open one last time. Didn't. The next morning, I wrote a letter to Ethan. I didn't plan to give it to him. I just needed to get the truth out of me. In it, I told him about how lonely I'd been. How small I'd felt. How I had let another man hold me. I didn't write Kwame's name. It didn't feel like it belonged there. I cried while writing it, then folded it carefully and slid it into my journal. I didn't give it to him. Not yet. That evening, Ethan returned from his trip. He looked tired. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how my weekend was. I told him it was quiet. He nodded. We sat down for dinner, clinking forks and chewing in that familiar heavy silence. After dinner I asked if he was happy. He looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" "Just in this. With me. With us." He shrugged. "We're fine, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, we're fine." Later, as we got into bed, he reached for my hand for the first time in weeks. I let him hold it. His grip was loose, unsure. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing slow. I thought about how easy it is to drift apart without anyone noticing. And how betrayal doesn't always start with desire, but with absence. I didn't confess. Not because I wanted to protect him, but because I didn't think he'd understand what had been missing in the first place. As I lay there, caught between two truths, what I had done and why I did it, I realized I might never fully escape the gray space between guilt and awakening. Sometimes betrayal isn't about passion or lust. Sometimes it's about refusing to keep shrinking just to make the silence bearable. And sometimes, the real affair is with the version of yourself you thought you'd never see again.